Hello, I am Atul Mathur and I am going to read my article titled The Final Deadline. I faced no deadline and so no pressure, but also no performance. I kept working on it for days until 16th March 2020 when I realized I badly needed a deadline if I wanted to produce the result. On that day, I committed to a friend that I would complete the article, the one you are listening to now, by 20th March. A deadline was born with an external accountability. Failure was still an option, but not without a cost. And the cost was embarrassment in the eyes of a dear friend if I missed the deadline. And it did its job. Deadlines know how to make us focus on what matters. We may resist them, but deadlines are all around us. From appearing at work, airports, exams, to submitting tender proposals, completing projects, and filing taxes. The daily life is dotted with all kinds of small and big, non-critical and critical deadlines. But what about the life itself? While we stay busy chasing all sorts of deadlines, the underlying life seems to be an endless journey. And yet, intuitively, we all know there is the final deadline somewhere down the road. Don't we? How would it be if a person suddenly comes face to face with that final deadline? That's the story of a little known but remarkable book titled Chasing Daylight: How My Forthcoming Death Transformed My Life by Eugene O'Kelley. Obviously, a scary book to pick up. After all, who reads a book with the dreaded D word in the title? But I did it anyway. And it turned out to be a beautiful guide on living a meaningful life. The final deadline shows up. The book starts with a pair of sentences that are difficult to digest when you read them together. I was blessed. I was told I had 3 months to live. How can someone who lived a classic American dream come true life, educated in Stanford, chairman and CEO of KPMG US, beautiful family with 2 daughters, golf, friends, clubs, high contacts, describe the 3-month ultimatum as a blessing? Having worked with KPMG for over 25 years and risen to the very top, Eugene truly lived a privileged life. Couldn't ask for more. In fact, he was among the top 50 CEOs invited to the White House to meet the US President in 2005. Whenever possible, for business and leisure, he was on some of the world's best golf courses, a perk that came with his title. He loved golf, especially playing in the late afternoon when the sun starts to go down and shadows of the trees grow larger and larger by the hour, and you feel as if you are chasing shadows. All was great until his wife noticed a droop on his right cheek. Dismissing it as something minor and probably stress related, he kept up with his fast paced schedule. But on a strong hunch, his wife insisted him to see a doctor. On 24th May 2005, they went to see a doctor, thinking it to be a routine visit. But that's the day when their world turned upside down. Following an MRI and few other tests, he was diagnosed with 3 large inoperable brain tumors. After consulting a top neurologist, 2 world-class neurosurgeons, and an oncologist, the verdict was clear. He won't survive his illness. And the estimate, 3 months. He writes, "A week before, I was living my life. Now, I was contemplating death." So how would he handle it? Getting real with the reality. As a child, Eugene adored baseball and even pitched for his school team. Though he thought himself to be pretty good at it, one day, when he was 14, his mother lovingly said, "You may have the passion to be a great baseball player, but not the talent." It took him several months to digest his mother's observation. But when he finally got to the college, he realized she was right. He didn't even make it to the team. He writes in the book, "Like it or not, that was my reality. I adjusted. As I got older, I learned to adjust faster. I cultivated an ability to make big shifts quickly, almost instantly." As if he had been preparing for the biggest shift of his life, within a few days of receiving the D verdict, he acknowledged his timeline was not longer like most people. He writes, "This is the way it is now. I admit it to myself. Now I needed to come up with goals that were achievable within that timeline." Clarity, intensity, perfection. As a young executive, he had always preached a commitment to goals, setting them, pursuing them, contemplating them, and completing them. Facing the final task of his life, he followed what he preached and set 3 goals. Goal number 1, leave my job. Goal number 2, choose a medical protocol that allows me to achieve the goal number 3, which was make the time remaining the best of my life and as good as it could possibly be for those most affected by my situation. I'll repeat the 3 goals. Number 1, leave my job. Number 2, choose a medical protocol that allows me to. And the goal number 3 was make the time remaining the best of my life and as good as it could possibly be for those most affected by my situation. The first goal was quick. He resigned from his position at KPMG in a matter of 2 weeks. Coming to the second goal, choosing the medical protocol, he faced a difficult choice. Should he go for chemotherapy? It may prolong his life by a few weeks or months, with no guarantees, but also inject toxicity in his body, severely affecting his functioning. Like a typical accountant, he did a cost-benefit analysis, keeping in mind the goal number 3, living the best life, and concluded prolonging life by a short time at the cost of its quality was not a wise choice. He declined chemotherapy. He writes, I resolved that I would make up in quality what I lacked in longevity. With 2 goals out of the way, he turned to the third one, creating the best time of his life. No confusion here as well. He simply made his final to-do list, which included get legal and financial affairs in order, unwind relationships, simplify, live in the moment, create great moments, begin the transition to the next state. And the last point in the list was plan my funeral. He writes, boiled down, I wanted this last period to be marked by resolution and closure, by heightened awareness, by the pleasure and joy of life. Boiled down is still further. I wanted these things and only these things: clarity, intensity, perfection. Reading his story, you may think he was emotionless in front of the scariest deadline. Not really. He got angry. Frequently, he cried too. He did fail many times at what he was trying to do with his final weeks. And yet, not once, he regretted his decision to control his own final journey the way he wanted. With a list in place, it was time to get going. Unwinding relationships. Typically, in a situation like this, one would feel helpless and overwhelmed while being showered with pity and sympathy by others. But as his life was unwinding, he also wanted to unwind the relationships in a beautiful and memorable way. So how did he go about it? Again, in a methodical manner. He drew 5 concentric circles and mapped all his relationships from the closest to the farthest. In the centermost circle, he put his wife. Next circle, his kids. Then immediate family. Until the 5th and outermost circle that included classmates, acquaintances, colleagues, and neighbors. After thinking a bit, he decided the order of unwindings. Outside in. Which meant he would slowly simplify his life and save the last most precious days for the most precious people in his life, family. Next, he resolved to make each of these unwindings as special as he could. He writes, I would make sure that the setting of our last encounter together was full of pleasure and pleasures. There would be good food and good wine. Or I would pick a beautiful spot for us to sit, for example, by the water or in view of flowers. In each case, I expressed my appreciation and gratitude. And I tried to focus on something especially meaningful about the relationship. In short, the exercise forced me to do the very thing that wiser people every now and then advise us to do. That is, to stop and look up long enough to think about the people we love and why we love them, and to go and tell them explicitly how we feel, because who knows when that opportunity will disappear forever. Along with the goodbyes, Eugene worked on raising his awareness to be more present. He learned meditation from his wife. He writes, I wanted to enjoy each meal, each walk, each talk, and not the future that loomed over everything, a future in which I played no physical part. As he was checking off the items in his to-do list, including the music to be played at his funeral, the candle was burning out fast. Shadows finally disappear. The last chapter of the book is written by his wife, Eugene O'Kelley, who incidentally had worked in a hospital and spent considerable time with people dying of AIDS. She writes, as a healthcare provider who had witnessed death routinely, I had come to realize that if you conquer your fear, you conquer your death. This had been my clearest message to Eugene during the last 3 months. By early September, Eugene was bedridden and had stopped taking food. In the afternoon on 10th September 2005, Corinne asked her husband if he was prepared to leave. He replied, I think so. She assured him she would be all right. The same day, in the evening, he left. Since he wanted us not to wait for our own final deadlines to focus on what really matters and live more meaningfully, he wrote this book, about which he said, I tell my story so that those who haven't been given my gift, by gift he means the final deadline, those who have not been given my gift may find it in here, something useful for their future, a long one I hope, and or their present, a deep one I hope. I repeat this sentence. I tell my story so that those who haven't been given my gift may find in here something useful for their future, a long one I hope, and their present, a deep one I hope. Deadlines often do their job well, whether it is finishing an article or figuring out what really matters. I feel like taking the liberty to leave you, the listeners, with a scary but hypothetical deadline. Please set the timer in your phone for 2 minutes and try to write the answer to this question. What would I do if I knew I had only 6 months to live? The article ends here. Thanks for listening.